We've talked quite a bit about information management over the past few weeks. We've talked about the science of communication and why it is important to match the most effective model to each situation. In today's video, we talk specifically about crisis and emergency risk communication. That is, how to disseminate information to people after a disaster has occurred. Now, I should note that by strict definition, a crisis is actually a turning point that decisively determines an outcome, follows a process, and is not altogether unexpected, while an emergency is a sudden, unforeseen situation that requires immediate action. So you'll often hear those terms interchanged, but in this course I'll try to use emergency risk communication to describe communication that's applied to an unexpected, urgent event. So why is emergency risk communication important? Well, first of all, let's define what it is. It's not mass mental therapy. You're not going to go out into a group, hold hands singing Kumbaya, and make everybody feel better. But it is a legitimate, vital response tool, and it can also be a resource multiplier. So by providing good crisis risk communication, you may be able to motivate an entire group of people to evacuate a town, say in the risk of flooding. It's also a strategy for managing mental stresses. So by giving good information, you can help to reduce the anxiety among a group of people. It's a mitigator of harmful behavior, so hopefully you can prevent some of those things from occurring. But most importantly, it's a tool to empower people to take action. Now, you've heard it said before, but I'll repeat, in a disaster, people crave information. It's as important to them as food or water. And here in the picture you can see in China, the crowd of people pressing forward to try to get any kind of information available to them on SARS. And this was in the early days when SARS was sweeping through their community. What people want most is actionable advice about how to protect themselves, their families, and their property. Now, that's an important concept that we'll come back to time and time again when we talk about emergency risk communication. But the thing is, people are not thinking clearly or hearing clearly during a disaster. And if you've been through one yourself, you can understand that specifically. In a crisis, people try to make sense of what's happening by comparing it to something in their past or by something unknown, and they will tend to base their decision on past experiences. So it's the public information officer's job to make sure that people get accurate, credible, timely information so they can take the appropriate action despite their emotions and then begin to cope and move toward that new normal. So by definition, emergency risk communication is an effort by experts to provide information that empowers an individual to make the best possible decision about his well-being within nearly impossible time constraints and to accept the imperfect nature of his choice during the emergency. So these are decisions that are not made in the luxury of your living room or even in a doctor's exam room. These are decisions being made in the emergency room when your life is on the line and you have to make a decision about whether to go through a surgery or not. This is emergency risk communication. Now, the main objective for the public information officer is to get the right information to the right people at the right time so they can make the right decision despite their emotions. And that's really boiling it down to the key concept. So how do you deliver that critical life-saving information that people are so desperate for? Well, the first, most important thing you have to do is identify with their emotions. And you do this with a genuine statement of empathy, because people don't care what you know until they know that you care, to quote Roy Rogers. But it's important. Credibility and trust are key factors in whether your message is going to be believed and acted upon. And to earn that, you have to listen to people's questions and concerns and answer them as openly and as honestly as you can. You also need to give them recommended actions to take and choices so they will feel empowered to be part of the solution. And your words and your actions have to match, because nonverbal communication will account for about 70% of your message, and it's going to be believed more than your words. In other words, people are going to look at your body language and your tone of voice and determine whether or not what you're telling them is actually the truth. So there are many different ways that a public information officer can deliver information. You can do it in face-to-face or through door-to-door, home-to-home. That's going to take a long time, but that way people are going to hear directly from you. You can distribute flyers or brochures, which is a good way to make sure that people get a printed copy of actual information. But one of the challenges there is some people don't read very well, and other people may even not look at that flyer. You can hold town meetings, and those have all kinds of challenges of their own, with emotions running high, and they can tend to get out of control. And you can also use the media. Now that's probably the way to reach the most people most quickly, but you don't have a whole lot of control over the message. So as you can see, there are many different ways to communicate. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. And the dissemination method may be different for each audience. So whether you like it or not, the public information officer really does need the media to help get important information to the public quickly and en masse, especially during a crisis response or an emergency response. They are a necessary partner in the public information management process. And next week we'll talk more about how to work with the media to get your key messages out to the audiences. But in any disaster, big or small, guess what? The media will be there. Now 10 years ago, the media looked very different. You might have a few television cameras, you might have a couple of reporters, maybe a newspaper reporter and a radio reporter. And deadlines were typically 5 and 6 p.m. newscasts and maybe midnight for the newspaper. But now, anyone with a cell phone can be a reporter. And we know that the news cycle is now 24/7, 365, which means no deadlines or constant deadlines, however you want to look at it. As a public information officer, you have to be prepared for a media onslaught. There are thousands and thousands of media outlets in the U.S. We know now that we have wall-to-wall coverage through satellite television and the internet. We have satellite uplink capability. We have national and international interest in even the smallest local story. So media want a front seat, and they want information now. But by preparing in advance, you'll save time, you'll maintain relationships with your local media, and you'll be able to protect the message when the disaster does occur. Emergency risk communication is going to be much more effective if you've planned for it in advance, and you can bring together a team and address the communication needs within your organization and among stakeholders and the public and the media. So before the emergency occurs, you need to draft an emergency risk communication plan. And that can be then quickly tailored to the specific details of an emergency when it occurs, and it can also be used to support the incident action plan. Now that plan should include your key messages. It should also include who your spokesperson is going to be, so you want to choose that person or persons in advance and make sure that they have training. It's also going to identify the crises that could occur to your organization. It's going to include relationship building with your local media, going out talking with them, explaining to them some of the things that could occur and how you would handle that. It's going to include your support team. Believe me, you're not going to be able to handle crisis risk communication or emergency risk communication as a single public information officer. So it will be important to build a support team around you. And it would be important for you to review that crisis emergency risk communication plan at least annually. So how do you get started with emergency risk communication once the incident has occurred? Well, the very first step that you need to take is to verify information with a credible source. That may mean calling back to your own organization, to your boss, or to subject matter experts or people in the field. It may mean talking with partners in the field, such as law enforcement or fire departments. But you do need to verify that information. Once you have verification, you go ahead and notify key persons. Now that at this point would include your boss and anybody else who will be directly impacted by the first piece of information you put out. And by that I mean stakeholders. The next thing you'll do is assess the situation, determine what type of public information is going to be needed. Think about who the different audiences are and how you can best get information to them. Again, is it going to be face-to-face, through the media, through flyers? What are those dissemination methods going to be? Then you're going to take the key messages that you've already developed and start adjusting those to fit the situation. Don't forget, in the heat of the moment, the excitement and adrenaline flowing, make sure you're getting approval to release that information, and that should come from your boss and from the incident commander if that's not your boss. And the final step, which is so important and sometimes is overlooked, is to make sure that you're monitoring the media, monitoring the hotlines, making sure that your message is getting out there and being received and acted upon, and evaluating your process to determine if you can do anything differently. Once you've done all those steps, guess what? You start over on the next information cycle. So early risk communication soon after the disaster occurs should focus on people's basic needs, which would be food, water, shelter, and safety. And communication with the public should begin as soon as possible by making an initial statement. You've got a tool in your digital documents called Emergency Risk Communication Message Development. And we'll talk about that tool just in the next few sentences here. Your initial statement should start with an empathetic statement that shows you identify with what your audience is feeling. Now, that doesn't mean I know how you feel. It means you have to put words to that. I understand that you're afraid. I understand that you're uncertain about the future. You have to be able to identify with your audience because remember, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. And that statement should be followed with information about what you do know. So that's the facts that you have verified, that you're aware of. And you may not have very many in the early stages. That's okay. You follow that with what you don't know, but the process you're taking to get answers. You'll often hear communicators that do a good job of this saying, what we know right now is that we've had a tornado touchdown in metropolitan Springfield area. We don't know how much damage it's caused. We don't know how many homes have been destroyed. We are gathering facts now. We have people in the field gathering information, and we'll get that to you. That's a great initial statement. The next thing you want to do is follow that with the statement of commitment and then provide resources for more information. So like in the example I just gave, we have people in the field gathering information. We'll provide an update within an hour, and you can find that information on our website or our Facebook page. That's how we provide that resource for people to go to get more information. Now, it's really important that this initial statement come out early in the response. In fact, as soon as possible, even if you don't have a whole lot of information, because people are going to judge your agency's level of preparedness on how quickly you respond with a statement. And they're also going to give more credibility to the first message they hear. So it is really important for your agency that you be first, be right, and be credible. After you've delivered that initial statement, you begin the cycle of gathering information, crafting or tailoring your key messages, and disseminating information to the various audiences. Now, one important source of information, of course, is going to be the incident command briefings, and it's imperative that the PIO attend these briefings. You will hold an essential position within the incident command structure. The public information officer reports directly to the incident commander. Now remember, information can be gathered from these briefings, but you must get approval from the incident commander before you release any information. And as I know you're aware, at incident briefings, there's often information released that shouldn't be given to the public. It's internal information that's going to be used for operations. So it's very important that you have a good sense of what the public needs to know and what they have the right to know, and then that you get that approved by the incident commander before releasing it. Now, you'll also gather information from other credible sources, such as subject matter experts and your partners and stakeholders. Now, you, of course, will monitor social media, traditional media, and hotlines or phone centers, but this is not so much to gather information to be released. It's monitoring for rumors or misinformation and public concerns that you can then turn around and respond to very quickly, providing accurate, credible, timely information. So during one tornado response that I recall, there was information that went, an ice storm response. There was information passed around the public that the emergency management office would be passing out generators to the public at a grocery store parking lot. So once we heard that on Facebook, we were able to quickly respond with true information about who generators were available to, and what the public needed to do to protect themselves. It is important that you listen to the public's concerns and questions and address them in your communication throughout the response. Now, as soon as you come on board the incident as the public information officer, you'll want to provide the media with your contact information by issuing a media advisory. And you can also include in that advisory any response guidelines that would be important to the media, such as the location of the media staging area, or if you've established a media credentialing or sign-in process. You'll want to make sure that that media staging area is established with a clear view to the south and no overhead power lines, because many media outlets will be bringing in satellite trucks. That media staging area should be close enough to the EOC that your elected officials and agency CEOs can get to the media staging area quickly, but not close enough that the media will interfere with your response work. So you also would want to establish regular media briefing times at a set location. We call this feed the beast, because if you're providing regular updates to the media at a set location, they will come there to get that information. You can keep your arms around the media a little bit better that way. You want to use these briefings when individual interviews are impractical, or when an incident has a community-wide impact, or when numerous agencies are involved. Also, when you need to ensure that all media hear the same message at the same time. So early in the response to a disaster, a media briefing is probably going to be the most effective way to get all the involved agencies together, get your key messages to the media all at one time, everybody hears the same thing, and then you can go back to work. Now, you're definitely going to need help as a public information officer. As soon as you begin collaborating with another public information officer, believe it or not, you've activated the Joint Information System, or the JIS. The JIS can be as small as 2 public information officers working together, or it can be as large as hundreds of public information officers working together, such as during the 9/11 attacks in New York. The JIS allows the public information officers to share resources and to collaborate on message development and to ensure that consistent messages are delivered. Now, the JIS can be run remotely or virtually, meaning you could be in your office and I could be in my office, but we're working together. But if we decide that it's going to be more productive for us to get together in one location and work together, then what we're going to do is open a JIC, a Joint Information Center. So more acronyms for you. The JIS takes place in the JIC. Now, within the Joint Information System, no agency has authority over another. The Public Information Officer for the Fire Department does not have more clout than the Public Information Officer for the Police Department. Each organization maintains its own identity, but they all work together under established policies and procedures to deliver consistent information. So whoever is the lead agency in the response, their Public Information Officer will be the lead Public Information Officer. They will help to guide response, help to set objectives, but they will not be the boss of any other public information officer. Now, this cycle of gathering information, verifying it, developing messages, releasing information, monitoring, evaluating, continues as long as the emergency response and recovery phases continue, and sometimes even longer than when you'll see first responders on the scene. You'll still be working within the information cycle. As the crisis becomes stabilized or the emergency becomes stabilized, the public information officer's role often does not stop, because you're still going to be giving reassuring information. You're going to be providing referrals. You may be providing recovery information, like where people can go to sign up for FEMA assistance or where they can find temporary housing. And you're also going to use this opportunity to educate people about mitigation for future events. So people are most receptive to emergency planning when they've just gone through an emergency. It's also important to thank the media who have done a good, fair job on stories. So a personal note to somebody, a phone call would be really important for building that relationship for the future. Also, keep in mind that you want to use anniversary dates to revisit helpful information. So a month from the tornado is a good time to remind people to check their emergency preparedness kit. A year from the anniversary, a good time. Even though people are going to be a little bit emotional perhaps about that, it's fresh on their minds and a good opportunity for you to look at mitigation. Don't forget to evaluate your performance. It's easy when the event is over to say, whew, that was over, it's over and done. But we really need to be critical about our own performance, look back as a public information officer, what could I have done better? What worked well? Where can I improve? And then incorporate those changes into your plan for the next response. That concludes our video for today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via text or email.